Ah, so I apologize for that. And as you're sharing what you were sharing,
Well, I've never
so
shared that anywhere else, and now
you've
I've not
never,
shared it yet,
oh
except with this
no,
small group.
oh no. So I was just asking Albert about his first sacred experience. As he was growing up, what was your first experience of the sacred? Would you mind saying it again? This is also
Oh,
so
come
personal.
on. No, I'm
I'm
not going to.
so sorry. Oh no, no. This is the first time you've shared it, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right, that's fair. That's only for the people who were here first. So that's personal. It's personal to share these things. So then might I ask you what was an experience, your first experience in a collective context, in a communal context where you had an experience of the sacred? Because I think many people don't ever have that.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. Going back to the first, I'd really have to delve a bit and figure that out. But I've had many experiences living in the 2/3 world in the Yucatan Peninsula. I've had experiences with Mayan ceremonies, with going down to the northern Brazil and having ayahuasca ceremonies with the Santo Dime and different other kinds of disciplines. I've had non-drug experiences with Zen Buddhism in temples and sitting with different Buddhist groups in Theravada and so forth, and with Swami Satchidananda and Swami Vishnu Devananda. And, I was on that whole, what Chung and Trungpa used to call this, the spiritual supermarket back in the 1970s.
Wow. Okay.
So, I was kind of on that trail all through the mid 60s to the early 70s before I settled myself down at the farm. And I joined what we like to call in those days a multi-stary. It wasn't a monastery, but it was householder yogis all living together.
Okay.
So we called it a multi-stary.
Wow. That's amazing. So yeah, a multi-stary. I never heard you describe that before. But what more profound spiritual practice than to have been someone who has lived at the farm in Tennessee? For those of you who aren't familiar, it is one of the original, actually a communitarian. I mean, it was an actual as an intentional community. What were some of the features that it was a spiritual community initially? It was, one of the better known examples of an eco-village, you could say, as well.
Yeah, we started the Global Eco-Village Network around 1996, and prior to that, we had been having meetings in different places, Denmark, Germany, to talk about joining together eco-villages as a Gestalt organization to be able to learn from each other and to shorten the learning curve for all of us. And that at the beginning of that process, I would say around 91, 92, somewhere in there, we could only identify about a dozen different eco-villages that we knew of. And the farm was one, Findhorn, Lebensgarten in Germany, Yamagishi-kai in Japan, Gaviotas in Colombia, Oroville in India, Svanholm and Christiania in Denmark, Solheimer in Iceland, Crystal Waters in Australia, Tlejo in South Africa, Huehuecoyot in Mexico. And so we actually started having meetings in each of those.
Wow.
And in the process, we drew in more information and more people who were involved in eco-villages or in experimental communities of a utopian bent. Some of them were quite old and we hadn't known about. And I mentioned Solheimer. Solheimer was started out of the anthroposophical philosophy back in 1930. So it had been going for quite a long time. It had old windmills that were built, electric generator windmills that were built back in the 1930s. And it had planted 1 million trees in Iceland to reforest after the Danish had turned all of their forests into charcoal. So
Incredible.
it was doing ecosystem restoration when we first encountered them in the 90s.
Amazing. That those examples are so stunning. And, I think, Albert, what I was so impressed with when I first met you and the community of other kind of eco-visionaries that were, part of this larger movement, is that not only were you, you created an intentional community, but you were offering something in the larger community, in the surrounding community, to regenerate the earth. I do want to mention there was someone who is in this chat, and I don't know who this person is, Harry Mack, and I did remove that person. So I just want to speak to that. I don't know if you know this person.
No.
Yeah. So in any case, I did remove him. So, I think it's not surprising, probably an indicator, Albert, of the potency of your work if there's a disruptor in the field. Unfortunate, but true to the times that we're in. So yeah, so just want to apologize to folks for that. When you have someone who is doing really powerful work, sometimes this is what happens. So but what I want to ask, though, is for those who are interested in the idea of the eco-village, how would you define an eco-village for yourself at this stage?
Okay, well, that's a lot of, there's a lot that goes into that.
Sure.
And, some of it is the history, and some of it is what we aspire to. Historically, eco-villages came into being from simultaneous ideas occurring in very far apart places at the same moment in history.
Okay.
So in 1975, the Mother Earth News coined the term eco-village. And there were similar things happening, same kinds of things happening before that. They just didn't use that word. And they were using it to describe the experimental farm that they had in Hendersonville, North Carolina, that was doing all this appropriate technology stuff and experiments in solar and water collection and so on, and novel buildings, organic gardening, and yada, 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 putting all that together in their Mother Earth News farm. And they use that to launch into a section of the magazine every month. And today that same program is continuing on in Asheville, North Carolina, at the Living Web Farm that Richard Freudenberger, who used to be a director for Mother Earth News, now does. But they took the word eco-village, actually Mother Earth News did, from an interview they did, their Plowboy interview with this architect who was part of the Frank Lloyd Wright Taliesin West School, who had a falling out with Wright over falling waters. And this architect, his name was George Ramsey, felt very strongly that the sacred parts of nature, like the waterfall at Falling Waters, should not be corrupted by building a house with that in its living room.
Wow.
That it was just disrespectful to do that sort of architecture. And that was the falling out he had with the Wright School. And so he got hired as a professor in the Beaux-Arts School in Paris. And he began running out some of these ideas. He did a publication or a presentation at the First World Energy Conference in 1978. That was the Association of Energy Engineers.
Wow.
Where he used the word eco-village to describe a small scale, car-free, close-in development with its own food supply. And it didn't necessarily have to be rural. It could be urban, it could be infill, it could be redevelopment. But that was where eco-village started really coming into the popular literature and to being understood as something that's an ecologically planned, harmonious connection between the built environment that humans tend to favor as, tribal animals, and the natural world that needs to be integrated and protected.
Mhm.
humans as part of the landscape,
Right.
not separate from the
Mm.
landscape, and done in a way that's also harmonious in other directions. The invisible architecture is the social relationships between people,
Absolutely.
how you self-govern, how you resolve disputes non-violently, how you have systems that are open and transparent and participatory. And all of that goes into the systemic design. It's more than just the built environment or what you see.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many dimensions. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, so even back in the late 70s, there was the original kind of emergence of that concept. And you'd said it was when was it, in the 96 that the Global Village Institute was found? No, when was it founded?
Well, let's take it back a couple of years before that.
Okay.
We had co-housing communities in Denmark,
Mm,
and Ross and Hildur Jackson were part of that movement. And they began looking beyond the social benefits of co-housing and
mm,
thinking more in terms of cooperative, low income, and ecological potential of co-housing.
mhm.
And so they thought what was needed was a more thorough redesign of cities, of
Oh,
human
absolutely.
habitation.
Wow. Yeah.
And so they started convening a small group in the early 90s. 91 was the first, and then 92 and 93. We started coming together, and I was invited to meet with a lot of different people in Denmark, and they formed the Danish Ecovillage Network in 1993.
Mm,
And then I began publishing a quarterly journal. Actually, before that, in the early 90s, Robert and Diane Gilman had a magazine
okay.
called In Context from
Ah,
Bainbridge, Ireland,
okay.
Washington. And they had lots of stories and interviews and talked about eco-villages. And Ross and Hildur brought them to Denmark to convene these meetings. And they published a book in 1991 called Ecovillages and Sustainable
Oh,
Communities that
that's when
kind of
that
laid
came out.
out. And that was the one that had like the original 10 or 12 that we knew about.
Yeah.
And I began publishing my journal, my quarterly called the Design Exchange in 1994. And then we founded the Ecovillage Network for the Americas that year. And I started the Ecovillage Training Center at the farm in Tennessee in 1995. Started doing courses in permaculture and natural building, organic gardening, other skills that we thought eco-villagers should have. And then the Global Ecovillage Network launched at the Habitat 2 conference in Istanbul in 1996. And I was on the initial board of directors for that. And later I was president from 2000 to 2004. And so we went from about a dozen identified experiments back in the early 90s to today. Jen has grown to 6,090 member communities in 105 countries as of 2022.
Wait,
And
6,009?
6,090 is the current
90.
number that's up
Wow.
on the website
Okay.
for ecovillage.org.
Amazing.
And the movement is estimated at some more than 30,000 experimental communities today. Those 6,000 are just the ones who have affiliated with the Global Ecovillage Network through regional hubs. But I think even 30,000 is a low estimate of how many there are in the world today.
Wow, that is incredible. That's amazing. From the perspective of an astrologer, I've always been intrigued by the early 90s in terms of the astrology of that time, which you may be familiar with. It's Neptune and Uranus came together at that time. And so I've always, when I remember first learning about deep ecology, about permaculture design, eco-villages, bioregionalism, it seemed like all of these things were emerging at that, in that time, but that, of course, so you were bringing forward some of these concepts that really haven't started to flourish until now. And now, again, we're so lucky to have you, because as we were just talking about, it's been pretty nonstop for you at this point, right? Because of your experience, you've got so many people in different communities who are asking you to come and speak to them about what you've learned over how you've lived in an actual intentional community since 72. So, and
well, actually, I wouldn't say nonstop, because in March of 2020, it came full stop.
Okay.
And
okay.
I was very, very grateful for
Oh,
that change of pace, because in 2019 I'd crossed the Atlantic 6 times,
wow.
and I was teaching and training permaculture instructors in China, and I visited Russia, and I spoke at the various different gatherings in Estonia and
Wow.
Brazil and other places. And so I was, jet setting, and I actually offset my entire carbon footprint every year through tree planting and biochar and bamboo and other means. But I was very much engaged in sort of like Johnny Ecovillage seed,
Yeah.
going around and spreading the gospel,
Wow.
which incidentally with me goes back 16 generations. My great great grandfather was Issachar Bates, who was a Shaker missionary. So I have missionary blood. He had written 400 more than 400 Shaker hymns.
Oh my
Issachar
goodness.
Bates.
Really?
There's
He was
there's a
Shaker.
biography of Issachar Bates that you can get.
Wow.
And that was my great grandfather. He was, interestingly enough, the founder of 2 utopian intentional communities. The first one was Harmony. What's it called? It's in southern Ohio. It's not Harmony. I'm trying to think of the name right now. But it's currently a National Historic Register site as a Shaker village, and you can go and I actually did this. My grandfather's house is on Airbnb, and it was built in 1805, and I actually went and stayed there. But my grandfather, when he was traveling through the wilderness, at that point, west was the Ohio River, and he walked down the Appalachians and headed out west and into Kentucky and Ohio Valley, and he had a campfire meeting with the prophet, who was the brother of the famous Shawnee chief, and the prophet had this back and forth with my grandfather about what his prophecy was and what eventually became the ghost dance and all that. And then my grandfather revealed his revelations of how he had seen figures in the clouds that had taught him certain things, and that he felt that we were in a prophetically determined time, and that he told his prophecies to the prophet. So they exchanged their things back then at this campfire meeting. And in that exchange, they both came to each other with respect, not necessarily believing or joining in the other's vision, but at least having mutual respect. And I noted that the prophet,
Albert, I'm sorry, I need to just stop you for a second, because I've never seen this before. Something's happening where we've gotten hacked in some way. So I don't know how. Have you ever seen that before? Because I've never seen this. But there are, and it's from people that I know. So someone is hacked in such a way that messages can come through appearing as if it's from someone, but it's really not from them. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
No.
No, this is very strange. I've
Damn,
never
there's some
seen
racist
anything.
ass comments, bro.
Yeah, there's some really
Just turn off the chat. Just,
you can turn that off.
Just turn the chat off.
Yeah. Okay. Let me figure out how I do that. Yeah, this is really I've never actually turned off a chat before, so this is a different experience for me. But yeah, so I apologize for that, everyone.
Okay, I just went to security. I don't know if you made me a moderator, but I just went into
I
security.
made you co-host. Yeah.
Okay, so I turned off the chat.
Thank you so much.
You can now chat with no one.
Okay. Okay, good. Wow. Well, Albert, that is the strangest thing ever.
Okay, so going back, just finishing up, putting a
thank
bow on that story.
Yes.
The prophet later named his daughter, who was a mixed blood daughter, Marcy Bates. And he had no family name of Bates anywhere in his lineage. But
Okay.
I have to take from that he was naming his daughter Marcy Bates as a token of respect for my grandfather.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you come by this honestly. I don't know how I never heard this story before. So you
Yeah,
have
you're
this.
bringing them out of me, Tammy.
I love the stories. So, oh my gosh. So Albert, yeah, even just in the numbers of people who literally, I'm sorry, excuse me. I want to make sure everybody's muting themselves. Here. Okay. Yeah, the numbers that have grown, even from in this period of time. I'm actually not letting anyone else in this chat. I just think we need to keep it secure. So the numbers that have grown are kind of exponential. And I think it's so striking because if I observe what's happening in the world around me right now, if I'm somebody who just watches, the mainstream news, and that's where I understand what's happening in the world, I have no clue that so many people across the globe are creating something that's completely different. So, when I read your writing, and I highly recommend that people follow Albert on Patreon, you can check out his blog. He has an incredible depth of resources. But when I think about what you're doing, and I think you've been you've been looking at what's coming in terms of climate change, in terms of larger, trends, and you're not afraid to look at what, is really looming in front of us. But at the same time, I think you're someone who sees what's positive that's emerging. How here in the US specifically, what do you see happening that gives you some form of hope or some sense of, or do you have a sense of hope about how we're moving forward? Because really the focus is here on the US right now with the Pluto return. It's just like, and I don't think people are seeing what's happening on the ground around them. So what kinds of trends do you see here in the US that kind of give you hope for how it is that we are kind of transforming the culture?
Well, I think there is room for hope. I'm sort of, a lot of my religious training has been in Buddhism. And so I have this attitude of non-attachment where I don't really hold out expectations for where things are going to go. I've been asked at times to, where would I put the possibility of near-term human extinction on a scale of, 1 to 100? And I would say we're 99% certain to become extinct by the end of this century.
Wow.
But that 1% is my bailing bucket in the lifeboat, and I can still bail. And I think that we actually have the tools. We know we have the methods. We know how to fix everything. We could have been doing this already for decades, and we're not, but we could. And if we started right now, there is indeed indigenous wisdom that could guide us.
Absolutely.
And we could find our way out. And the best example of that is how much time I've been spending on biochar, because that comes out of the Terra Preta do Indio, the dark earths of the Amazon. And I started seeing that in the 1990s and started writing about it. And I saw it from a permaculture perspective, but it was actually a discovery that could withdraw enough carbon from the atmosphere to bring the climate back to pre-industrial levels of carbon
so you
dioxide.
believe in all that climate change
Wow.
bullshit?
So can you mute whoever that was?
Yeah, I am definitely.
And what I saw when I was studying the Terra Preta is that you have a natural solution that's actually been tested in real time. So many of these things that we talk about in climate negative emissions technologies and direct air capture and the idea of having some mechanical trees that will pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, those are untested. And they have a lot of issues about where does the energy come from? How do you pay for them? Is it a tax and things like that? And so those go away if you start to work with natural solutions and you actually have the real-time experience to historical experiences.
Mm.
The first one was in the Mongol invasion of Europe from the east, where the sons of Genghis Khan went as far as Vienna. And as they traveled, they would burn down all the villages. They were not nice people, and they just left wastelands behind them. But they took out all those cities and towns and agricultural pastures and so forth. And what grew back was trees. And if you look at the historic record from the paleo climate of the post ice age, as we came out of the last ice age, we got up to about 6 trillion trees in the world. Today, we're down in the range of 1 to 3 trillion trees left in the world, and they're vanishing quickly.
Wow.
And so what happened after the Mongol invasion was 700 million tons of carbon dioxide was removed to the atmosphere to reforest Europe and particularly Eastern Europe, Western Asia from the Mongol invasion. And so that was an actual withdrawal through natural mechanisms of carbon dioxide in a short time frame. And it so changed the climate that you had these new kind of microclimates springing up, and the Moors were driven out of Africa and into Spain. And you had the development of the Andalusian warhorse and the Toledo steel in response to the Moorish invasion. And then that led directly, straight line, to the conquistadors, who traveled across the ocean and invaded the Americas, and with their Toledo steel and their Andalusian warhorses. And that then had a secondary climate change effect, which we see from the deforestation during the periods from 20,000 years ago, gradual deforestation of much of the Americas by human settlement. So you had monumental cities that are described by the early conquistadors like Orellana traveling down the Amazon from Ecuador and describing these monumental great white cities. And then 50 years later, all of those have vanished from disease and slavery and European impacts on the Columbian encounter. And so what you had as a result was somewhere between 4 and 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere. And what happened there was the black earths that had been created by those indigenous societies then grew massive amounts of forest and trees and helped with that carbon withdrawal. And in that process, you lost like 99% of the population of the Americas, but you got back all those trees. And so that caused a little ice age in Europe. You had this medieval ice age where Louis XIV had to put parquet floors in the palace in Versailles, and the Swedes invaded Denmark over the ice, and Hans Brinker wins his silver skates and all that on the frozen canals. So that's all from withdrawal of carbon dioxide through mechanisms like reforestation and biochar.
Okay.
Right?
Wow.
So we have this
Incredible.
historical example of indigenous natural methods of climate reversal that you can point to and say, aha, well, if we just now, never mind enslaving people or bringing new diseases, although we seem to be doing that. Instead of that, let's just plant trees and make biochar, and plant bamboo and make biochar. And we can change the atmosphere back, and we can stop climate change. We can reverse it and take it back to where it was pre-industrial.
Brilliant. Yeah, I know you, Albert, to be a person who is continually on the track of what are the possible ways that we can address these massive issues. And biochar, that's something when did you write your first book on biochar? If anybody wants to check it out, where can they find it? Because that would have
been 2009, the Biochar Solution, Carbon Farming and Climate Change, with Vandana Shiva writing the foreword to that.
Yes, brilliant. Yeah, so anybody wants to check that out. Albert has so many incredible resources, and you're currently now using those resources, or you're creating biochar. Yeah, okay, awesome.
Okay, so these are 2 more recent books.
Okay.
This one here, Burn, which is backwards on my screen, but it's the non-agricultural uses of biochar, all the things it does that are good for you, like eating it or feeding it to your animals.
Okay. Charcoal. Okay.
Oh, you eat that shit, yo.
And then this is the German edition, which if you don't read German, it's cool down is the German words for this book.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. And
and it's about
only
making
in German?
biocoal or biochar.
Is it only in German? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's just the translation of this book. So
Okay.
burn has been
Okay. Okay. I
translated,
see. I see.
and the German translation of burn, if you want to learn a little German, is cool down.
That's so funny. Wow, Albert, that's incredible. So I know that you have our mutual friend Murad, who is the Palestinian with the green thumb, has just come to visit from his permaculture farm in the West Bank in Palestine. He was telling me, because you were during 2020, you were in Mexico, you weren't back at the farm. He was describing your bamboo, like you have a pretty phenomenal lot of bamboo now that you're navigating and that you're using to create biochar. Is that part of what you're doing right
Yeah.
now? Yeah.
Well, bamboo is the fastest growing terrestrial plant, the
Yeah.
greatest net photosynthetic productivity.
Mhm.
The fastest one on the planet is algae, but that's mostly marine. So on land, it's bamboo, and bamboo will grow as far away from itself. A grove of bamboo will go as far away from itself as it is tall, and it will
Okay.
double its biomass annually. And so you can continuously draw down clumps of bamboo out of a grove, and it will continuously regenerate. And it's phenomenal in its growth. And so when I was away, I was quarantined in the
Yeah.
Yucatan Peninsula for 2.5 years. And when I finally came back, it was like, there's some precedent for this, which is if you've ever watched the movie, the newer version of Orson Welles, or you have the Time Machine. So there's a version of the Time Machine, and when they go forward in time 20,000 years, they come into the earth that's completely covered with bamboo. So this is what happens when you leave bamboo untended. And
Okay.
and so I came back, and I need to get it back from the driveway, and I need to
Unattended, these nuts in your
open up
mouth.
my spaces around my wetlands and so forth, around too close to the roof lines of my houses, and so I have to fix all that. And so Murad helped me in chopping down a lot of bamboo and trimming it and putting it into biochar, doing all that with it. And it is extremely valuable and extremely useful as a way of using photosynthesis to reverse the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's amazing. So you
Tracy,
so you're
excuse me, there's
sticking
somebody,
into-
there's a Zoom bomber in the chat.
Yeah.
You see it says the N-word.
Yes, I really apologize to everyone and Albert for this. I've never
we
seen
just-
this before.
Can we just ignore him? He's not very interesting, actually.
True. He's pretty boring. Yeah, we can do that. This is
Excuse me?
Hey, Albert, you were saying?
Yeah, I know. I was just finished talking about biochar
okay.
and
Awesome.
bamboo.
Mhm.
I'm a fan of bamboo. I'm a bambusero. I have a neighbor who grows 300 different varieties of it here.
Wait a minute. I just
Unbelievable.
got called uninteresting by somebody.
Unbelievable. Yeah. I'm sorry I'm gonna have to do this, but I'm gonna remove the people that it might be. So I'm just gonna do that. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe you could ask everyone to go on their video, and the ones that don't go on their video, you could remove.
Great idea.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
saying, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. It's nice to see everybody's faces anyway, because we are
Yeah.
a community here. Yeah,
Yeah, one is the one
Nice.
that is one of those that was doing that.
it was okay. All right.
So we have a project in Belize now, and that's some of why I was in southern Mexico and in the Yucatan. We're also doing a similar project in Panama, where it's called the Cool Lab. And the idea there is to have a micro enterprise hub in a rural village, particularly in a Mayan reserve in the case of Belize, where we're in a natural reserve that's set aside by the government for Maya peoples, and they have a lot of problems. One of the problems is in migration from Guatemala, which has a huge ecological problem and political problems and so forth. And so they are, the Maya people of Guatemala are trickling across the border illegally into Belize, and where they're going for refuge is the Mayan reservations of Belize. And so what we're having to figure out, okay, how can we provide the services that they need, medical, food, adequate sanitation, education for the kids, and so on. And some of what we've come up with is this idea of a cool lab. And the cool lab grows agroforestry crops, bamboo could be one of them, and then it extracts the valuable materials from those, and perhaps it's cacao, organic cacao, perhaps it's coconuts, perhaps it's papayas, any number of different agroforestry crops. And then you take the waste products, the cacao pods or the coconut husk or whatever, and you turn that into biochar. And now you've got an exothermic process, because pyrolysis is exothermic, meaning that you can use that heat so you can make electricity. You can have an electrical station in the village that comes from the waste products. And now you also have the possibility of using that for water filtration, so you can clean the water. You can have it for fertilizer. You can have it for animal feed, which reduces methane and improves weight gain in animals, and reduces or removes completely the need for antibiotics. And all of those are benefits that come from having the biochar products. Plus, you have the benefit possibly of leaf protein extract, where you can press leaves and make leaf protein extracts, which could be another added value-added product. You can weave from the stems and vines and so forth, which is another artisanal tradition there, and that you could then have those products for sale. You can have a networking micro enterprise hub, which would be village led, which any of those refugees from Guatemala or the local Mayan population could then use to find employment, which would provide additional income into the village, which would also be able to build the infrastructure like the health clinics and the schools and so forth. All of that could come out of this eco enterprise cool lab. And so that's the concept, and we're kind of pitching that right now. Belize has some commitments from the Commonwealth, because it's a Commonwealth country. Panama, we have some commitments from like the Prince of Monaco and others who are interested in doing demonstrations that have carbon dioxide removal, but also tick the sustainable development goals. So we tick off about 12 of the 17 goals, and we can do all of that in these model hubs. And the other piece of that is they don't necessarily need to scale like gigantic, like something where Bill Gates would put $100 million into building a mega factory. Instead, you could actually do this from at a village scale, and it can scale laterally, horizontally, where one village adopts it because they see another village doing it. And each one might have only 20 to 30 participants, but you can keep multiplying those out until you're drawing gigatons of carbon out of the atmosphere while improving the lives of all those people.
Wow. No, Albert, I feel like sometimes just when you're a person who has this big of a vision or this big of visions, like what I'm feeling when I'm talking to you, what I see when I speak with you, what I am really feeling in my heart as well, is just, it's like you have this map in your consciousness, right, of the whole earth. And you've been holding this for a really long time. And also perceiving potential possible lines, timelines, and futures, and trying to move out from these projects that you've been literally tangibly working on in Tennessee, that you've been supporting with all across the globe, these little pods. I think I'm just, as someone who often thinks about things in the big picture, I guess I'm interested, how do you hold it? How do you hold all of this in your consciousness? How do you hold, and also the love and the care for the planet, and hold the realities of what we're facing right now, and keep that, what am I trying to say? It's like, yeah, how do you hold all of this and then keep this flame and this passion to continually be finding these potential solutions? How do you do that?
I think, there's a discipline, and I'm not sure exactly how I came to having this discipline, but I was with, when I was in grad school in New York back in the early 70s, late 60s, I was sitting with Swami Satchidananda and others, and I would be understanding the nature of the path of the Bodhisattva, and understanding the difference between Hinayana and Mahayana. And if you take the literal translation of those words, Hinayana is like the small boat. It's taking care of yourself and looking to yourself and trying to achieve enlightenment for yourself. And a lot of people are on that noble path.
Yes.
And then you have the Mahayana path, which is understanding that there is no final and perfect enlightenment until everyone is elevated. And so from the Mahayana perspective, or the big boat, you can just put aside personal attainment as a goal. And there are schools of Buddhism and different forms of religions in different places that actually say you should abhor that. It's to be avoided. It's a pitfall to pursue that. But for me, doing projects like what we're doing with the peoples of Belize or in Panama, where we're working with the Kuna, it's the idea of these are solutions which are replicable, which can be adopted because they're attractive, they're flavorful, they're pleasant smelling and tasting. And so you tend to be drawn to those like honey. And it's not like you're saying, well, you got to have a carbon tax and everybody's got to stop eating meat and these other kinds of hair-shirt approaches. And it's more like, look at how happy these people are who live in Ecovillage. And also that's what I would say about how does this scale, is that it has the wind of inevitability at its back. That we have, just watching what happened during COVID in the last couple of years, and what's happened in the Ukraine from the people fleeing the Ukrainian conflict, and they're going from the war zone and the eco-villages in Ukraine in areas outside the war zone, and also all across Europe. Eco-villages are opening their doors, and permaculture farms and co-housing and so on, and they're all opening their doors to these migrants. And during COVID, you had this differences of opinion about vaccines and so forth, and quite a lot of chaos and people willing to mask or not so. And eco-villages could decide amongst themselves and set a standard, and then they could they could create their own bubble, and then they would be safe grounds. And if they had their own school, the kids could go to school as normal. If they had their own medical clinics and so forth, they could treat their own people. And so you didn't have the potential for infection, the mass infection potential. And most of the people who've been surveyed who live in eco-villages in Europe have said about 85% of their lives were the same, and 15% had to change. And outside in the outside world, about 15% of your life was the same, and 85% had to change. And so that's what I say when I say the wind of inevitability. As we experience the world on pandemics, from zoonosis, from cutting down rainforests, from opening up permafrost, we're going to get a lot more viral infections of novel kinds. And as we experience the world on climate change, and as we, burning down of Australia, or the drought in California, or if 45 million refugees expected from famines caused by the current food crisis from the war, well, we're going to have a whole lot of movement around the planet. And if you begin to provide these refuges, which are actually doing the work of ecosystem restoration where they are, and now you have more hands to do the work, of planting trees and building water features and restoring the soil and so on. All of that feeds into this positive spiral of solving the world's problems while making lives better. And you begin to have people, children in particular, who have much better experiences, even though they just came out of a war zone. Now they're thrust into growing up in an eco-village. And even if they don't stay there, even if they leave and go live somewhere else later, they still had that experience in their formative years. And it's kind of like part of their epigenetic makeup now, right? So that's where I see this is going to scale.
Absolutely. I love that. I love what you're saying about the replicability of it. I've always been so intrigued by that too, when you're creating this system that then can be easily adapted by someone else. And also that it's delicious, that it's juicy. It's like the nectar. It's like this other way of life, because clearly people are seeing that the way we've been living is not working. It's soulless. So I think what I love about what you're speaking to is we're in a bit of a vacuum right now. And so people need to see some example of what's possible. And I see you as having, devoted, so much of your life to bringing visibility to these kinds of things. So when you have someone coming to you and they're considering starting an eco-village, or bringing together people to create a community, what are some of the common, what are some pieces of advice that you might give them? Like, what are some of the challenges that might face, but also, this is a very big question. I realize that, Albert. But yeah, I mean, at this stage, it's a very different thing to start an eco-village than it was when, you were first living at the farm in this community. How is it different now? What do you
Well,
tell
that's
people?
true. It is different. We bought our land for $70 an acre, and I challenge you to do that today.
That's true.
you
It's
know.
expensive. Land is expensive. Yeah, there's that.
But this is a good question to save for Diana Leaf Christian, because she wrote a book called Finding
She
Community.
did, yeah.
And,
We'll definitely
and
recommend it.
yeah, and
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
thing about that is, one of the lessons I take away from her, and I've had her as a teacher in my training center here, is to first see if there's an eco-village you can join and move to, rather than to try to start one on your own.
Yes.
And this is where we sort of get into the individualism of modern culture, where we all think that we have a better idea than anybody else, and that somehow we won't really get along with people because they won't have our same philosophy. But in point of fact, anytime you start anything that involves a group, there's going to be a group dynamic, and there's going to be a melting pot effect. And you have to be able to give up some of your own ego and go with the group will of the group, even if you don't necessarily agree with it, but you agree to disagree, and you agree to allow whatever is going to happen to play out, so that more people can see what's actually going to happen and what's likely or what's possible. So from that standpoint, you try and go around and figure out which existing experimental communities are most aligned with what it is you want.
Yes.
And you might find it based on weather and climate, or you might find it based on what kind of job offerings they have, or how connected they are to a nearby city or part of a city, or maybe they're totally prepper oriented and getting ready for the zombie apocalypse, and that's your sort of thing. And so now you're going to go out there and get ready for the zombie apocalypse with all those friends. And so, that's the thing, is you just sort of have a psychodemographic that you align with. And that's really the way to get started, not to try to break ground, particularly in a green field. You want to try to restore a damaged environment if you can.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. That's such good counsel. And yeah, Diana, you're right. Diana will speak more to that. So I've been interested in following the work that you've been doing around the Haudenosaunee. Because as you know, part of my inspiration for this was the eclipses crisscrossing our territories, and the research that showed that the Haudenosaunee actually founded their Great Law of Peace immediately after a total solar eclipse had swept through their territory, right? So what do you think we have to learn from the example of the Haudenosaunee, as a people here in the US? What is it that we can learn from them at this time?
Well, before the peacemaker went to the Five Nations, he started on the coast of what was was later to become Massachusetts. And he met Hiawatha, and the two of them, that was his first convert. And from that interaction, they developed a system of record keeping where Hiawatha would weave the teachings of the peacemaker into a beaded belt made of polished seashells, tiny little shells of a particular mollusk that were pearly white. And they would have mollusk shells that were purple and so on, that they would use to make patterns that would tell a story. So they made these belts, which were later called wampum, and those belts had the history or the particular lesson that the peacemaker was trying to get across. So when they went to each of the Five Nations, which were warring with each other, they would come in and Hiawatha would explain the wampum belt and explain the principles, and the peacemaker would make his presentations and his discussion of how things could change, which created the Great Law of Peace. And I, in my recent writings last month, compared that system to the blockchain, and to NFTs, non-fungible tokens, because we claim, a lot of writers, Jose Barraro and John Mowat, have explained how the constitutional system of the United States derived from the founding fathers going and observing the longhouse systems of democracy, and then that got ported over into the US Constitution. And this was also something, this monetary system or non-fungible token system, which was the wampum, and the Europeans only saw that as money. They said, oh, those belts are just how they exchange money. That's like the dollars for them. And that wasn't it at all. They didn't get it. And what it really was a proof of work and a proof of trust. So the proof of work was the process, usually done by women, of creating the wampum belts, which told the stories and kept the stories in visual form. And then you had the proof of trust, which is the wampum belts were entrusted to someone for life. And they were a particular griot who would learn the story from the previous holder of that belt. And they would tell that story with perfect fidelity, with no alterations, at every important meeting that concerned the lesson in that belt. So that at least once a year, and probably more times, they would be telling with perfect fidelity that story. And that would be the proof of trust. And that was the blockchain ledger. And so when the wampum belt passed through 500 years, it was as true to the original story told by the peacemaker to Hiawatha as it was when it was told, with no corruptions. And then the first corruptions came when the holders of the belts died, and their relatives or others came in and stole the belts and tried to sell them or did sell them, and they got into the hands of private holders who put them in exhibits like the Wild West Buffalo Bill Show or the Smithsonian Museum or whatever. Only recently, just in the last 5 years, has the Smithsonian returned to the Haudenosaunee 11 or 15 of the most important wampum belts in their history. So those are now back in the hands of the Haudenosaunee from the Smithsonian, which had gathered them in from private collectors. And so that's actually now in the process of being restored to the original narratives and
Mm.
to lifetime holders of trust to rebuild the blockchain now in 2022, after a brief hiatus of 100 years or so.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, that's an amazing story, and also a positive. I mean, to know that they're finally getting that back. What are the implications of that? You also had spoken to a recent court case involving, what is it? It's a lake near Syracuse,
Yeah, Onondaga.
Onondaga. Okay,
That's actually been in litigation for a very long time.
okay.
And it was a sacred place. It was the center of the Onondaga Nation, which
Mhm.
was one of the five nations
Five Nations. Yeah.
in the Finger Lakes region of upstate New York. And a glacial formed beautiful lake that fed by several rivers, and it was very beautiful. Had I don't know, maybe 100 different kinds of fish that were
Wow.
considered edible or useful in some fashion,
Mhm.
and just a wonderful place until you had white settlement in the region. And that was in the late 18th century, early 19th century, where you started to have industries like asbestos and
Right.
brick making and different kinds of things, which just had no restrictions on what they could dump into the lake.
Hmm.
And they said, "Oh, it's a big lake; it can take it." And no, it got
No.
very seriously damaged, and since the 1940s, it's not been considered potable. There's no fishing allowed. There's no swimming allowed, and finally the Onondaga Nation said, "Okay, enough is enough. We have the Safe Drinking Water Act. We have these other protections by the National Environmental Protection Act," and they sued. And that case went up and down through various courts over many years. It's been to the United States Supreme Court at least once. And there's been these mediated settlements where they're giving some authority of the native peoples to be able to advise, but not yet really control that watershed. And so as a result, they've stopped the incoming pollution, but they've done very little to do actual remediation of the lake. And so that's an ongoing court case, court battle by the nation to try to recover Onondaga Lake.
Okay, yeah, but it's something ongoing. Okay, thanks for sharing that. So yeah, I imagine we're at an hour, which has gone by incredibly rapidly, and I'm gonna guess that there are many in the circle who would have questions as well for you, who might want to know a bit more. So if we have people who have questions, we're really lucky to have Albert here. And again, the range of questions that we can ask is so big and deep. I want to just open it up to see if there are others who have questions.
Yeah, I'd have a question if there's a moment.
Absolutely, Killian.
Albert, I heard you say the other day, and I heard you say in this call, that rather than starting new eco-villages, people should be joining existing ones. And I get that in terms of, especially if you're new to the process or anything like that, then a learning process would be very good. But at the same time, we do have to make space for another billion or 1.5 billion people. So new spaces are going to be needed, and we're going to have a lot of climate migration, things like that. So there's a bit of a push and pull against new ones versus joining old ones. So how do we rectify that issue?
I don't know if you were on the call in Clubhouse the other day where we were talking about the process in China now, but Xi Jinping has co-opted the word eco-village in Chinese and is building these eco-villages of 7,000 residents in various different places. And I have to say, I've been to those and they're not bad. It's not what I would quite call an eco-village in the sense of the invisible architecture of transparency and consensus processes and determining different aspects of self-sovereignty. But on the other hand, it's a real step up in terms of rural development of China in having sovereignty of energy systems. So you have photovoltaics and wind that's giving your village independence that way. Food systems, so every house has its own garden. Plus there's community gardens. Plus there is full employment, and they figured that out ahead of time. And they're making biochar in a massive way, which is coming from crop residues and going back to improve the gardens and improve the crops that are being produced. And they're converting large areas, vast acreage, to agroforestry from traditional monocrops. And that's also excellent. They're teaching people all of the skills of agroforestry and how they can live with forests to produce all the different things that they need besides food. And bringing in, wild animals are attracted into those situations. So you're rewilding China, which has had a huge problem of biodiversity. And, from a standpoint of actual effects, yes, it's state run. Yes, it's state mandated. Yes, you have the whole architectural planning process of China. On the other hand, those eco-villages really are doing good things, and they're much better alternative, especially better quality of life for the people living in them than the previous, what had existed prior to that. So yeah, it's not an either or, a template cookie cutter approach. And, there are Camp Hill communities that are anthroposophical in origin and in context, and those are fine. Those are good, doing good things. There's the Green Kibbutz movement in Israel, which, despite what you might have in politics of Palestinian occupation, you've still got the kibbutzim, many of whom are totally sympathetic with the Palestinians and wanting to coordinate or be part of the Palestinian permaculture collective. Unfortunately, they're stopped by their government, as are the Palestinians, from having any direct connections with the other. But they do share a commonality, and they know that. And if given the opportunity, they would coordinate between the permaculturists on the West Bank and the permaculturists in Israel. So we have these different kinds of contexts, and everyone's going to be a little bit different, but they are scaling each of them in their own way.
That's so, I just want to maybe speak to, I think maybe whenever Albert, you're saying, or Diana Leaf Christian is saying, first think about joining another eco-village. I don't think you're really saying don't start your own. It's just, it's a massive undertaking, right? Maybe it's more, that there are plenty of these projects that are also wanting and needing humans. So, yeah.
Well, the other thing is, there's the question of sustainability, and I did a Clubhouse room on this a few weeks ago that's actually available on replay now. It's going to be put up on YouTube at some point from the Climate Chat Club. And it's about sustainability and community. Why does a community sustain versus those that fail after 5 years? And there was a classic study done by the Harvard professor Rosabeth Moss Kanter many years ago, where she found that those communities that had a spiritual orientation typically had a lifetime of around 50 years. And those that had a secular orientation tended to fail in the first 5 years.
Wow.
The survivors were few in number compared to the startups. And there is like, trying to start a restaurant. Your chances of survival as an eco-village were probably about the same as starting a restaurant, unless you had a spiritual orientation. And so that gets around to what my friend Jan Bang, who's a former kibbutznik, says is the difference between people who are living lives of meaning and people who are standing waiting for a bus. So, you can have groups of people, and you can call them different things. You can put names on groups of people, but the question is, what are their aspirations and what do they intend and what is it they want out of life? And if they share that, they are stronger as a whole and have a better survival possibility than if they were just randomly thrown together.
Oh, yeah, yeah, beautiful. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And that kind of connects to the sacred culture piece too. I mean, but when I think about the farm itself, it started with a particular spiritual root, and that's kind of evolved. Do you think, Albert, in terms of the
Yeah,
spiritual?
absolutely. And we
Yeah.
we renew that all the time.
You renew
We
that
have
all
group
the time.
meditation here every Sunday, and we actually have Zoom call meditations once a
You
month
do?
for all
Ah.
the people who are not on the farm, who are farther away but used to be here, but are still part of what we would call our church.
Mm.
And so we meditate together, and we renew ourselves by having these collective discussions. Lately, the younger people on the farm, those who were born here or born to people who were born here, we're now, my personal family is now 4 generations here, that we're having a renewed interest from the younger people to learn from the founders while the founders are still alive.
Mm-hmm.
And so for that purpose, we have a Monday night class where we gather together. We have a gazebo down at the head of the roads where several roads come together in a field. And we have a gazebo in the middle of that field. And so we're having every Monday night, and this has been going on for a year now, a gathering together to share stories. And it used to be, we did that, we had a ritual every All Hallows Eve on the farm, October 31st. We would gather together in the cemetery, and we would share stories of the people who were permanent residents.
Right.
They were in that category of permanent residency now.
Yes, right.
So each of those people had personal relationships with and would tell stories of, this is when I met this person, or this is a funny thing that happened to us on a sales trip to Mississippi, or something, some story of history. And that way the stories of those who went before were preserved, but also you preserve the nature of community in it's not temporal.
Right.
Here we are in the day out of time. And so that we when we speak of the community of the farm, we're not speaking just of those who are alive with us now. It's those who went before included in our sense of who is our community. And you don't lose that by just passing to a different plane. So that's now the Monday night class is bringing to the next generation more in-depth stories of our origins, not just on the farm, but before that in San Francisco, on the bus caravan of traveling around looking for land. All of those kinds of stories are now being retold by the people who actually experienced them. And that's now being held in the memory of people who are in their teens and 20s.
Oh, that's extraordinary. That's wonderful.
I have a question. I went to an eco-village called Tamera in Portugal. Do you know it?
I've been there multiple times. Yes.
I mean, I found that they were having difficulty in being sustainable, and some of the agriculture wasn't working, and they had to buy their supplies from local suppliers. And the fish, they couldn't eat the fish in the lake because they were vegetarian. So I'm wondering, is that common? And I mean, how important is it to eat the fish in the river or in the lake?
Well, honestly, the Portugal is a very challenged place to live in the present Anthropocene era, as we're seeing now from the fires and so forth that are happening there, and the drought that they're experiencing, which is unprecedented in history. And so it's a challenge to be there. They're in an environment where they came in and they regenerated a relatively arid area with all of these lakes that they had learned to do from the examples of the Kramerhof in Switzerland and so forth. And they had brought in these good permaculture principles and planted trees and so on and so forth. But now all of that's under this challenge of these waves of heat, and the question becomes, is it sustainable here, or should we be thinking of relocating? And a lot of things that we would love to be doing here at the farm, we've been putting in water systems similar to what they put in there at Tamera And also we've had, we've learned a lot from their technologies of solar water heating, solar power, and so on, solar greenhouses. That's all been really useful to us. But we're having to think and have meetings to talk about what if the southeastern forests start to burn? What if it's more than 100 degrees Fahrenheit here for week after week? And you know what? It's like that in July right now. And so what if it's 120 every day? And what if our forests turn brown and all these oak trees can't take it, and the hickory trees and the maple trees? And the last ice age, the fastest runners in the tree kingdom that populated the North American continent were spruce, and they could cover 700 miles in a century, which is very fast among trees. But even the fastest trees at 70 miles a decade would not keep up with climate change as it's changing now. So North America is moving its latitudes of heat faster than 70 miles per decade from south to north. So we have to think about, practically speaking, should we relocate the farm to Prince Edward Island now? Would that be smart? Or
Right.
should we try to keep it, but do something in terraforming that's going to put more water into our environment and keep our forests green and those sorts of things? And that's the challenge for us.
Wow. What I hear though is that you have the bonds that you've established over so many years that you can have that level of conversation, which is quite rare.
Yeah.
Incredibly rare. And as I'm looking across on the faces in the group, and I just see Bia, I keep seeing you, Bia, and really happy that you're here again. I'm just, it's so good to see your face. And I know that when I first started learning about ecovillages, like for so many people, it was like this, like you said, it's delicious. You did such a great job of like, here's this incredible, delicious thing that is an alternative to what we're doing now. And it's really compelling. And then I started, I was really asking the questions, like I think so many of us now, how do we move forward as a collective in a sustainable manner? And more, and I was trying to experiment with like little urban ecovillages, block-based projects in Albuquerque, but more and more what I came to recognize is many systems or tools we have around ecological restoration, which are incredibly important to have those. The real challenge for us are the social technologies, like how, and especially now, how do we actually remember how to co-regulate? There's a lot of talk now in that way, thinking about nervous systems and how do we co-regulate. And I think this is something that elders like yourself who have lived in these kinds of communities, and you're in the wisdom you carry from having seen so many, I'm guessing you might also, you might have seen that as well. I mean, if you think about the deep levels of intelligence that you've accumulated by living in community in the way you have, how do you think people in an everyday, like in the US, like how is it you think that we're going to learn how to restore those kinds of bonds so that we can create community in a good way, and not just in eco-villages, but in our neighborhoods?
Yeah, I despair at trying to change neighbors who are set in their ways.
That's the hardest thing, right?
Yeah, I don't even try. We're here in the Deep South, and we knew that coming in back in the early 70s that it would be like that. Yeah. And we have had a powerful influence, and we created a transition town movement in our county seat here, which drew in a lot of people, including the Old Order Amish and the Mennonites and the preppers and the various different people from around the area who were of like mind in many ways. And that created a sort of a critical mass of people who could think through some of the issues, and we could bring in selected speakers to talk to us about, permaculture or natural building or raising chickens or whatever people were interested in hearing about. And that created a nice group of diverse people of lots of traditional religious views and things, but nonetheless able to come to some sort of colloquy with each other on a very friendly basis, which is, good from a standpoint of having good security, but also good in the terms of being able to think together, what's the future going to hold and what can we be doing now to improve on all of that. And so we do our farm market day now every once a month on a Saturday. We open the farm to what we call market day, and it brings in, again, the old order Amish with their horse and buggies, and the preppers, and the people who are homesteaders in various fashions, and they all set up booths, and we do different kinds of trades, and it's fun. We have speakers come in, like maybe a local politician will come in and speak, and they're running for some public office, and they have to kind of align their talk to, the greenies. Now we got to talk to the greenies. So if we want these votes, we got to start coming up with something that's a little more green.
Right. That's how it happens. Wow.
Yeah, that's how it happens. And but it's good because it doesn't, we're trying not to create walls of separation. And my focus has been to think more about the next generations. And that's why I started a training center that was focused more on, and from having been here and been our innkeeper, and if you ever want that job again, it's an open position. From having been here that you get a lot of interesting apprentices and interns and
incredible
students coming through for permaculture and things. And some of those go on to do great things and create wonderful things. But one of the things that we did and have been doing for 35 or 40 years now is our Kids to the Country summer camp. So that's going on right now. Is we have our kids that we go to the neighborhoods, the low income neighborhoods in cities like Nashville, and we have local people who live there who are coordinators for us, and they recruit children and get parental permission for kids who are particularly deprived. Maybe they've never had any experience outside of concrete walls and sidewalks and cityscapes, and now they're allowed to spend a week or two going out and living in the country and learning horseback riding and swimming and canoeing and nature walks where they do herbal identification or different kinds of experiences of natural building and so forth. And all of that for a couple of weeks gives them a taste of nature, which they did not have in their lifetime experiences before that. And, they are typically afraid of spiders and snakes and creepy crawlies. And so going out to the country is a little bit intimidating, but they get over that. And they learn to, identify plants and be able to see where their food comes from and do a little gardening and have some experiences with other kids who are like them, but maybe they never met before. And sometimes we've expanded that to include Chattanooga and Memphis, where we've gone into neighborhoods and brought those kids out as well. But it's a completely different demographic than the middle class hippies of the farm. Even racially, it's different. So from that standpoint, we make an effort to not be limiting in who we think of when we're thinking of who is going to inherit the future from us. And it's not necessarily going to be middle-class white hippie types. It's going to be a mix of lots of different kinds of people. And if we can have the experience that they have as children and modify that enough that they really get the picture of what needs to happen in the world and how it could be and how life could be so much infinitely better if we did this or that, that's really dramatically informative.
That's such an incredible program. And it's, again, this is what I saw even in the Vision Council gatherings. You're doing this incredible thing in your own community, and then there's the outreach to the community around you, and being sure that there's the relationship building back and forth, that's so essential, and that this is something that you're transmitting as part of the model feels absolutely vital for new eco-villagers. Such an important piece. Is there anybody else who has? I know we're getting to the end of our time, and want to make sure if there's any other people who have questions before we close, that be that we do that. You know, Albert, I'm trying to remember, there was a sign on the door in the main, I think the main office, and I'm trying to remember what it was about how, I think of this quote. It's something about,
Enter as strangers, leave as friends.
no. It was about how, you know, you can't really know. It's if you have an impossible dream, you don't know how long it's going to happen. It's going to take to happen. What is that? It's like, oh my gosh, no, enter as friends. Yeah, I remember that one too. Oh, I can't even.
Well, we also have one up that's a direct quote from the Peacemaker.
Okay,
That's on
what's
the
that?
wall. I don't remember the direct quote, but it was something to the effect of you cannot have peace without justice. That peace only comes from hearing the personal problems, issues of every person, and that even then it's going to be imperfect because justice itself is never perfect. And so all you can really say and all you can really hope for is a good process.
It's a good process. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think that that's, you know, what those individuals who are starting up their own communities are joining into pre-existing communities. I think one of the big learnings for all of us is going to be about how to be in process with other humans in a really rich and meaningful and coherent way. So I think that that's a great quote. Is there anything, Albert, you know, as you, again, just like going back to that kind of core, thinking about where we're at here in the US, kind of looking at the larger frame, what advice might you give for those of us, we don't live in, you know, I don't live in a community. I'm not starting a community. I'm just here. You know, I mean, I live in it, but it's not an eco-village, right? I'm just trying to connect with other people who share or are of like mind, trying to create that in kind of an organic way. What kind of advice would you give to people now in terms of how we find our place to engage and create something beautiful around us? Like, how do we, at this time where it can feel like, you know, if you're looking daily at the heat waves across, you're looking at what's happening with climate change. Yeah, how do we make meaningful change in our communities where we live, where we are right now, from your years of experience?
Well, you're doing it here. You know, here we are all together in this room.
Yeah, it's a little.
And you know, we're blessed to have this app that didn't exist when the farm started, and you know, came into its own during COVID. But it's been we're able now to speak at the speed of light around the world with each other through this magic box. I'm looking at an iPad.
Yeah.
So I've got this magic wafer in front of me. And so it's like, okay, well, I don't know how long that'll last.
Yeah,
I
right,
can't say whether a solar flare will suddenly wipe out this Elon Musk satellite system and all of the internet that's bringing this to us through some electromagnetic pulse. I can't say that couldn't happen instantaneously and all this would be wiped clean. You know, and I don't know what the future holds. None of us really does. All we can say generally is that you can have a good life anyway. And we had good lives before we had Zoom. And we had good lives before we had the World Wide Web. And we had good lives and communication around the world before we had email.
Yeah.
So all of that existed before. And you can have, you know, healthy, happy children with clean air and clean water. And you can have much to celebrate in the seasonal celebrations of harvest and fertility and renewal. All of those celebrations have meaning, and it doesn't depend on anything external or technological. It's something that you can bring to it yourself and you can create with a small group of friends, and you can rejuvenate yourself all the time, continuously, constantly by doing that. You start fresh every day. We are in the day out of time, and yet here we are. So,
Yeah, thank you.
Bia, what do you got to say?
Yeah, Via.
Well, another way resident member born here, next generation, and I are collaborating on an idea that I think has great potential for, as talking about some of this. Well, how do we go ahead, even if they're not people aren't in an eco village? And what we're looking at is a bioregional focus. We're trying to initiate what we're calling it the Tepoztlan Bioregional Alliance. And we've identified a lot of people who are doing good things, but they're not in contact with one another.
Exactly. Yes.
And so that seems something. And then we have this place that can be a center for events and trainings, and God knows we could use some help in our landscaping and our garden and all that we want to address. But we're saying, we want to identify these people, or have them identify themselves as allies, and then do some of the things that I started doing in Chicago back in the day, in the early 90s, and to help people understand, where are we on the planet? What is going on here? And so creating a wheel of the year. How do you know it's February in Mexico, central Mexico? Well, etc. So for me, it really feels interesting to go back and pick up a lot of those things that we did back in Chicago and implement them here within the context of this bioregion, and get people to look at things a little differently. So that's what.
Yeah, that's great.
That's great.
When we started our Transition Towns project in Hohenwald is kind of a Tea Party Tepoztlan. And it was our county seat, the nearest big town to us. And Hohenwald actually was started by Swiss immigrants who came in to put in the railroad there and created a little Swiss colony in the middle of Tennessee. And Hohenwald means high forest in Swiss German. So we were a forest area in the southeastern United States. And so what we did was we revitalized that heritage. We put value back into it. And people started putting Swiss chalet trim on their houses and their places of businesses along the main street. And we held an annual heritage festival called Sonnenschein, the Sunshine Festival in High German, which was the renewable energy, permaculture, all those kinds of things that we're having booths, and everybody brings their homemade pies and stuff like that. And we have things like iron skillet throws and old pioneer stuff, right? And yeah, so that was kind of the idea is what's the demographic, what's the psychographic for this region. And Hohenwald, it's really is more red state kind of mentality. But on the other hand, we brought in the Chamber of Commerce and created an alternative currency that's called chamber bucks. It was a complementary currency, and you could buy anything you wanted in the participating stores or the restaurants or whatever in chamber bucks. Which is our experiment with getting off of the dollar. And who could imagine that a red state like Tennessee with the Tea Party and everything would be experimenting with complementary currencies? But there you are. And so that sort of thing, we actually have a buffer zone around the farm now where people are moving in to the forest around us in neighboring lots, and they're sort of setting up this kind of village scape around us. They're not living on the farm per se, but they're connecting, and they're sort of like similar thinking people to us. And so we tend to have like attract like birds,
Of course.
And so we're starting to get more of that.
Wow.
I wanted to, sorry.
Go ahead.
If I may. Yeah, I wanted to support what Bia just said about bioregions. Bioregionalism has been around for, 100 years or so, it seems, which I didn't know until a few years ago. But I absolutely agree with that. Looking at how indigenous societies live within their spaces, and then just looking at how nature functions within, river systems primarily, and creating bioregions and how they seem to be a functioning whole. I came up with a concept that has ended up being kind of reinventing the wheel, that I call regenerative governance that encourages people to actively organize along bioregional lines. And, you know, let's connect everything together, create, you know, feedback loops amongst all the communities and intentionally do it bioregionally. And so I completely agree with that.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's Gilly. And I want to just really say that when that's so incredible and courageous that you're doing that. And we have elders we're lucky enough right now that we are connecting with who have done this kind of work, and to know that this is not easy. You know, it's like when I was even creating this event, my sister Tracy, I was just having a day where I'm like, what am I doing? Is this too big, too vast, whatever? What did you say, Tracy? You're like, pioneers always have to break ground. Like, that's just what you do. And so, you know, and that's true for anybody who's doing this work. You know, I think we're taught so much that you do it and it should just happen so easily and in flow. And yes, sometimes it does, but sometimes when you're creating something completely different like that, you know, it's quite exciting though. You know, and I feel like what I've gained so deeply from you, Albert, from you, Bea, from this whole movement, I have all these seeds planted in my imagination that have been flowering, you know, like what's possible for us as a humanity, like these new stories, what you just said about your neighbors, you know, and these new stories about what's possible. I think we need that, you know, humans right now need these very vibrant, diverse ideas and seeds for what we can create together. And that it's an adventure. It's a grand adventure, you know, whether you live in an eco-village or not. Go ahead.
I was talking last night with one of my friends who's still in the States and was very much part of our bioregional efforts in Chicago, the Wild Onion region.
Right.
Just in case you didn't know, Chicago, supposedly in Potawatomi, means place of the smelly onion, because in the spring of the year, by the rivers, you know, in the region that defined the region, it really had quite the atmosphere. You could smell, you knew you were getting close when you could smell the onion.
Wow.
But what I really wanted to add here was that we also internally with the organization and doing the work of creating this bioregional group, you know, interest and so on, was we said, if it's not fun, we don't do it. And
yeah.
Frivolous, it was more, you know, it was sort of a mindset, but it also meant we set aside a lot that bureaucracy and other things just to get it done.
No, that's an important point of scaling anything, I think, is that if it ain't fun, ain't nobody going to do it.
Exactly.
So you got to keep it fun.
You have to keep it fun. Yeah.
Hey,
wow.
Albert, are you coming to visit us anytime soon?
No plans, but I would mention that, you know, when we started the Ecovillage Network of the Americas, one of the first gatherings or meetings that we had was the Mestitla camp for the Bioregional Consejo de Visiones there.
There's going to be another one in December.
December 4th.
Well, now you got me there, Bea, because I will be in Mexico. I have my green card. I have my temporary residency card. So I will be in Mexico starting about late October, early November. And I'm going to be down in the Yucatan in Quintana Roo, but you know, it might be worth the trip up there just for the Mestitla reunion.
Absolutely, you bet. Well, you know, siempre estás bienvenido en tu casa.
Igualmente, mi casa en Holbox.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, so and we're really promoting that event also through these gatherings. So December 4th, who knows which faces you're going to see in the space for the Vision Council gathering there. Albert, thank you so much for your time and for your stories and for the this feeling of hopefulness and possibility, even as we're looking, you know, at what really with clear eyes. And yeah, thank you for this incredible work that you're doing. And Bea, thank you for being here as well, and for everyone for remaining through this really essential conversation. So
nice to see Tracy and Killian and others that I know. Very, very good to see y'all.
Yeah, Albert, we're going to have to definitely get you on the program at the Vision Council, because we can't miss the opportunity to have you there at Mestitla here. It's extremely beautiful. And
well, now you get me on the program, you pay my way down, then you've got a better
Then we get
not my department, but
all right.
All right.
Love you all.
Okay.
Abrazos.
Be well.
Ciao.
Thank you so much.
Bezels.
you.